Welcome in to the Blake Street Banner, the Rockies Insider on Blake Street Banner on YouTube. I'm your host, Patrick Lyons, and joining me is another host, Noah Spyrick. Noah, debut. It's all about the debuts this weekend for the Colorado Rockies. How exciting is this time right now to be a fan of this team?
It is so awesome, not only to see Chase Dollander go out and do pretty well, room for improvement for sure, but I thought for a rookie making his first career start at Coors Field, he did great. And now Zac Veen is on his way to Denver. It's super exciting.
Yeah, this we'll talk plenty about Chase Dollander's debut on Sunday against the A's and Zac Veen's probable debut on Tuesday. He'll debut at Coors Field, that's for sure. But in the starting lineup on Tuesday against the Milwaukee Brewers, what can we expect of those two guys? Who's waiting in the wings right now at AAA? Who is going to get the next big opportunity? Not to say that anyone is already past these two players because their careers have just started. And it feels like perhaps just maybe April 6th could be the day that we point to the calendar and say, this was when things started to turn around. Now, we don't know where they'll end up, if it's the World Series, if it's even just a postseason berth, if it's next year, or if it's 3-4 years down the line. But much like how last August 16th was the start after Elias Diaz was designated for assignment and waived, and Drew Romo came up, and that next wave of young players, mostly relief pitchers, perhaps April 6th, 2025 could be that big day where we look back and say, this was the start of a change in culture for the Colorado Rockies.
I think it has to be looked at as that. This is a team that hasn't qualified for the postseason since 2018, as we all know. And it's a team that has not really come close since. And so to see some groundwork being laid towards the future instead of the everyday veterans hoping to get you to 70 wins it's refreshing.
Yeah, I think in light of these call-ups so quickly after the opening day rosters were announced and the initial and rightfully so disappointment by a lot of people in the Rockies world, and even those on the outside of the Rockies who are baseball fans just looking and saying, what are the Rockies doing? Give an opportunity to these young guys. It does seem perhaps no harm, no foul that both of these guys are up so quickly into the season where, not sure what really went into that decision to go with a more veteran staff for the first 8-9 games of the season. I think it really was about trying to get off to the best possible start. And in many ways, 2-7 might have been the best possible start with the veterans. If it was 1-8 or 0-9 to start the year, and you've got Dollander in the rotation and Zac Veen in your left field, that becomes even all the more problematic. So I sort of tend to think, and I'm curious of your thoughts, I tend to think that it is no harm, no foul, that, okay, everybody's in the right place. It could have happened a week or two earlier. The fact that it didn't is not the end of the world, and all is in general, maybe, perhaps made right in the grand scheme of things with the Nolan Jones, Tyler Freeman trade, and then also another 26-year-old outfielder that hits from the left-hand side is picked up in Mickey Moniak. And now as the dust has settled, it is kind of what I think everybody had wanted and expected from this roster on opening day 2025.
Yeah, I had a little bit of fun asking in our group chat yesterday, if the Rockies had been 4-5 or 5-4 instead of 2-7, do these call-ups happen? I don't know, because in a team that isn't expected by most to do or compete anywhere close to the postseason this year, I think a quick start matters more than a team that is like the Dodgers, who of course got off to a quick start. I don't know if they're going to lose 10 games this season, but I'm glad regardless that the moves are being made, because it's nice to, when you're watching a Rockies game and they could be down 5 runs. Okay, well, you see who's due up. Zac Veen's due up. This is an at-bat worth sitting down and looking forward to watching in the bottom half of the inning. And Patrick, I know you've explained this before, but I'm going to ask you to explain it again for those who haven't heard it, and I also just need a refresher. Is there some strategy to bringing up the prospects now where in the first 2 weeks of the season they can qualify for some award that might help repay the Rockies later?
Yes, and kind of no. So you touched on something there saying, well, what would have happened if they were, say, 5, 5-4? Like the decision to call up Dollander and Veen is not a panic the decision. Maybe more so. You could argue that perhaps the Dollander call up is a little bit more of a panic because that is a domino effect of Austin Gomber not being able to come back on the 15-day IL on April 8th. So, he's hasn't picked up a ball since that start on March 28th in Sacramento. And I think one of the, because the rotation has been so strong, there's no rush to get him back and to have him pitch at, 85, 90%. So Dollander can slide into that spot. So that's more of, the fact that that's what the personnel is working with. Zac Veen, you could argue that, all right, well, these guys that we gave the opportunity to that are maybe more veteran types or just unproven. You could maybe put Mickey Moniak in the unproven category, despite having back-to-back 14 homer seasons. You say, okay, maybe that one is more of an underlying situation because of the start. And so it is interesting to think if they were perhaps 5-4 to begin the year, would these moves have possibly come? And, I don't know the answer to that. I don't know if it's totally true. So, perhaps maybe the front office doesn't, deserve to get a little of that credit, but it is working out that way. So I tend to think that, in some shape or form, it was going to happen probably sooner than later. Maybe you would have had 2 or 3 more starts of Dollander down in Albuquerque and another week of Zac Veen catching fire before something changed. But to the first part of your question with PPI, the prospect promotion incentive, if a player is on the top 100 list of any 2 of the major publications, those being Baseball America, ESPN, and MLB.com. So if you are on 2 of those lists, immediately you have the potential to get your team some bonuses. Ezekiel Tovar is one of those players who still could earn some incentives for the Colorado Rockies because he was a top 100 prospect. We saw that in the past year where Bobby Witt Jr. finished second in AL MVP voting. If you're in the top 3 of MVP or Cy Young Award, your team gets a compensation pick. So the Royals get that compensation pick because they started Bobby Witt Jr. not just on the opening day roster, but he was on the roster for essentially the final 172 days of the season. So 172 days is how many you need for a full year of service time. And even then there's some wiggle room. So if Dollander would have been on the opening day roster, every single day of a season, I believe there's 186 is the exact number. And so there's about 14 off days. So 100, or actually there's more than that. But 172 is that magic number to get to. And so if Dollander is on the roster the rest of the season, even if he goes down to the minors for no more than 20 days, he can still get big league service time credit for that. And so Chase Dollander, should he win the NL Rookie of the Year award? And I'll say that one because it's hard for a rookie to win the MVP, for a rookie to win the Cy Young award. So let's just focus on Rookie of the Year. If he does win the Rookie of the Year award, the Rockies would get a first-round compensation pick that comes after the typical first 30 picks. So it would probably be pick number 31. It would come with about a $3 million bonus pool price tag that the Rockies can use however they want to try to convince someone to possibly fall to them at the 4th overall pick. So if there's a college player that's a junior and saying, I might go back to school if you don't hit this number at $9 million, well, the Rockies sitting at 4, they don't have $9 million in that number 4 pick. But if you couple that with the compensation pick that they potentially could get with the Chase Dollander winning the Rookie of the Year award, now all of a sudden they take the best overall player in this year's draft at the number 4 spot. Again, a lot needs to happen for that to go down. So Dollander does make that potential for them. And then the next 2 seasons beyond 2025, when he's still in that arbitration window, he can also earn that kind of compensation. It's just him and Charlie Condon, who we know is out and injured. So, and he will not be in the majors, and he very well next year might stay on 2 of those 3 top 100 lists. So he could still potentially earn an incentive pick, a compensation pick for the Rockies next year. But Zac Veen, despite in the past being on top 100 prospect lists, he is no longer considered or deemed to be a top 100 prospect. So if he goes out and balls out, the Rockies and wins the Rookie of the Year award, the Rockies will not be getting a compensation pick for him.
Well, I hope he balls out and wins it, because that's some disrespect. I mean, Veen at one point was ranked so highly, and then injuries have kind of just torn him down. I do think that system is super cool, because you look across NBA, MLB, NFL, and even NHL. I'm not sure if there's another system quite like that. Maybe in hockey. I don't follow hockey too closely. I do follow college basketball, though. You got a pick for tonight's national title between Houston and Florida?
Me, go Gators.
Okay, there you there we go. We have the Patrick Lyons Rockies insider pick for the championship. I am going with the Houston Cougars. But we should be talking about the Tennessee Volunteers, because Chase Dollander had a stellar debut yesterday. What do you think? You were there. What did you see from Chase?
Yeah, it was good stuff. I mean, look, he was going against more advanced hitters than he's really faced in the past. He, if you go back and look at some of the lineups that he faced in spring training, a lot of those lineups were missing some of the team's best players. In fact, if you go back and see who the A's ran out against him, because he did face them in spring training, that was the one start where he was kind of the most erratic and walked the most batters, and they're just very patient. There weren't. I think Lawrence Butler wasn't in that lineup, and Jacob Wilson. So there were a couple guys that were held out of that game. So he is getting that. He's being thrown into the deep end, but he's a good swimmer. He's one of the best swimmers in the shallow end. He should eventually be a very good deep end swimmer. And so I thought he looked great, showed a lot of poise. He gave up a couple long balls, gave up 2 homers, one of which was to Tyler Soderstrom, who's been in the majors in parts of the last 3 seasons, and yet he's 59 days younger than Chase Dollander, which is wild to think. He was selected out of high school as a catcher in the 2020 draft. But he shook off those strikeouts. And then in the 4th inning, where he had given up 3 consecutive singles, walked the 4th batter, came back and got 2 consecutive strikeouts, and you saw that emotion on his face. In fact, the first 4 innings, he ended with an emphatic strikeout to get out of that jam, where sometimes you need a punch out. And in speaking with Kyle Freeland Sunday post game, I said, you did it in Philadelphia with the bases loaded and got Schwarber, Bohm, and Bryce Harper. Sometimes you got to go out and say, the only way I get out of this jam is if these guys go down swinging, and I get them out singularly by myself. Dollander understood that in that moment, and he was able to tap into that. And that's not something that a ton of Rockies pitchers are really able to do. Freeland himself, I don't think can do it, consistently. But when he needs to, he's going to go and get that done. Marquez is someone that certainly has in the past. I think we've seen Feltner, be able to touch on that, and now Dollander. So that's an incredible skill to have, that strikeout ability. So, I thought his off-speed pitches looked good. He definitely had a lot more command than Germán Marquez on Saturday night, who said that he just couldn't feel the ball. His circulation was fine, but there was something about the ball that it was wet. It was a little bit cold. I think he'll end up being fine. But, Dollander looked great. He had a lot of poise about him with, one of the larger scrums that we've had at Coors Field in a while, surrounding him at his locker. He answered every question with ease, didn't get rattled. You didn't hear that little frog in the back of some young players' throats, or short abbreviated answers because they're, maybe getting tired and fatigued. And man, this is going on a very long time. No, he answered every question as truly as possible. So, while not a no-hitter in your major league debut kind of situation or pure dominance, I think it showed a lot of poise, a lot of promise, and definitely big things are to come from Dollander in just this season alone.
Yeah, Chase Dollander, he topped out at 99.3, I believe. And that was fun. That was on his strikeout to end the 5th, where Blake Street got to clip the gif of him being fired up, and the fans love that. I love when Freeland shows that emotion.
Yeah.
Anytime a guy cares, I think it fires the fans up. Glad you touched on Germán, because he's now at 993 career strikeouts, so we need to have the counter going for him to get to 1,000. He already leads the franchise all time, but that's pretty cool. being able to set the table and be the first guy in franchise history to reach 1,000 after battling a couple of just bad luck injuries. That would be incredible to see. Let's see here. I had a direction where I wanted to go and it's evading me. It will come back to me. But after just one start from Dollander, are we able to project the rest of the season? What kind of goals and aspirations for him?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think, he's in the rotation now. This is not a spot start. Again, because Gomber's not going to be ready to go. We'll see if he can return maybe by the end of April. But, at this point, I think he's going to need at least 2 rehab starts, maybe a third. So that right there tells you that's going to be much of the rest of this month, even if he's able to come back at that point. So he's going to be around in this rotation going forward, and he's going to get those opportunities. And by the time that, maybe, Gomber comes back, somebody else is hurt. You hope that's not the case. Or maybe you just want to give Senzatella and Marquez, 2 weeks off where, look, this is their first full season back from Tommy John. That could benefit them. So I think with Dollander, what I find to be so interesting is, he's wearing the number 32, and you can read about this over on justbaseball.com, the article I wrote about Dollander's weekend, and, with his family coming in, and of course his news of his debut and his call up getting spoiled by a text coming from his Denver area hotel, and just how, again, the poise I think that he had, which was just great. But the number 32 was selected because Mike Tiny Ponarelli, the clubhouse manager of the Rockies, said, this could be the next big pitcher that we have. You could argue that it's the biggest starting pitcher debut since Kyle Freeland. Freeland was not in the top 100 when he made his debut in 2017. He was right after he was drafted, but then fell out of those ranks, whereas Dollander has stayed in the top 100 since he was drafted immediately in 2023, 9th overall out of the University of Tennessee, and John Gray, selected 3rd overall out of the University of Oklahoma. He stayed in the top 100, and he was that guy that was supposed to be this franchise-changing starting pitcher. And if you look at his numbers, you argue, well, definitely he wasn't. But if you look at everything that came after his debut, you can definitely argue it did begin to change for this team. So that number 32 is interesting because, okay, he might not ever reach the Hall of Fame heights of a Steve Carlton or of a Sandy Koufax or even Colorado's own Roy Halladay from Arvada West. But maybe more realistically is, coincidentally, the number 32 was worn by Jason Jennings, who is the only Rookie of the Year award winner in Colorado Rockies history. And if you go back and compare the rookie seasons for every starting pitcher in franchise history, and you just look at wins above replacement, what Jason Jennings did in 2002 is about the 8th or 9th best season for a rookie starter in team history. So some of it was situational, right? He had an ERA in the low 4s, which now if you saw a pitcher with that, unless it was a Paul Skeens and you say, yeah, but how many 10 plus strikeout games did he have? Yeah. Right. You could find a way to say there's potential there. Sure. His ERA looks a little inflated, a little bloated, but you can see that there's a superstar there. I don't necessarily know that was the case with Jason Jennings. It was just a matter of, damn, this guy's doing it in Colorado. We haven't seen a young pitcher be that productive and that effective right away. So for Dollander, if you look at some of the best seasons in the last, say, 4 years since 2021, which have all been, amongst the 4 worst seasons in franchise history, there have been some really good campaigns for Rockies starters in the low 4s, even at about 4.45 ERA. Gomber is certainly one that's had stretches. Freeland has had stretches of anywhere from 10 to 16 games where you go, this is one of the best pitchers in the game, or maybe certainly in the top 25. And if Dollander can have those kind of stretches, I think perhaps some voters, when it comes time to sit down and cast their Rookie of the Year award ballot, they might be able to throw out some of those rougher performances. Giving up 4 runs in 5 innings against the A's is an average kind of performance. And at Coors Field, that's sort of a quality start, right? It's 1 less than 6 and it's 1 more run than 3, but you'll take, going into the 6th inning, only allowing 4 runs with your bullpen coming up. So that's an average start. If he can have some really great starts and potentially meet that hot take that you forced me into of a 15 strikeout performance, we'll see. But if he can have some of those big games and have only a few of those really rough ones, I think voters might be able to sift those really bad starts out and say, okay, if we exclude these 4 starts where, he went 3 innings and he gave up 7 runs, overall, this young man had a 3.5, 3.6 ERA. You know what? That might be good enough, to get my Rookie of the Year award vote. Maybe 1, maybe 2, maybe 3rd place on that ballot. So I think it's reasonable for him to have an ERA in the low mid 4. So 4.45 ERA is what I think he's going to have, which again is a solid season for a Colorado Rockies starting pitcher.
Yeah, I'm with you. I think that's a realistic goal as well. And I know the way he works. And gosh, every time he gives up any base runner, he just looks hacked off. And I love that because the dude is an ace and he knows it. I like that you mentioned John Gray and Kyle Freeland because the last 2 Rockies pitchers to start the wild card game, because they have not won the division yet, were John Gray and Kyle Freeland. And so if the next pitcher to start a playoff game for the Rockies is Chase Dollander, I think everything's going according to plan. So that is all looking in the right direction. I want to take a second to answer Philip's question in the chat. What do we think the Rockies' appetite is for a 6-man rotation? I know that you asked Buddy this during spring training, and the answer was no. Has his answer changed?
I don't think the answer has changed right now. There's not 6 men to be in that rotation. If Gomber is healthy, you can go 6. And I think the best starting on average, not talking about when again guys are on point and they're on a hot one right now. They're on a heater, but on average, the best Rockies starter and the worst, it's not a big difference. It's not a big gap, right? So if you have a typical 6-man rotation, let's say you're the Texas Rangers, you're waiting now an extra day for Jacob deGrom. And over the course of a season, that's now, maybe 2 or 3 extra starts that you're not getting from a Jacob deGrom or a Nathan Eovaldi. So when you've got, at least one clear ace of your staff or just a true ace in general, you're shaving off a little bit from that guy. And I'm not necessarily sure what you're gaining by having that 6-man in the rotation, because now that also means there's one less guy in the bullpen that you can utilize. So those starters now have to be on point. So the Rockies only have 5 right now, but when Gomber comes back, could they go with something like that? I think potentially, but a lot of that I think is predicated on that rotation performing and not, forcing the long reliever out there and not taxing that bullpen, which right now the bullpen really hasn't been taxed. I think in that first week of the season where they're on the road, they had used their bullpen less than any team out there. So if that continues, that's going to keep those guys fresh. It could allow them to cycle in some more guys down in AAA. And, it's something that is possible, but I don't really think that that's necessarily going to happen, just because that conversation, I think, had a lot to do with including Dollander. And now I think it's going to probably be more like, let's exclude one of the other 5. Maybe it's more likely than not a Marquez or a Senzatella that has to now sit on the sideline or be in the bullpen, or might be, on the IL, whether it's because they just need general rest or because they are actually hurt. Ryan saying, rather than a 6-man, Rockies should utilize a 7-day IL for starting pitchers and arm fatigue to give guys some extra rest without losing an arm in the bullpen. You do have to worry about, obviously, manipulation of, injured list. You can't fake injuries and things of that nature. I don't believe there's a 7-day IL anymore for starting pitchers. It's 15. I think right after the pandemic, there was a 10-day IL. And conveniently, just about every single Dodger pitcher, got to go on the 10-day IL. Which for a starting pitcher is like you're missing 1 start, right? If you start on the 1st of the month, your next start would be the 6th. And then your next start after that, you might end up being like the 11th or the 12th. Well, if you go on the 10-day IL after, say, April 1st, you're eligible to come back on April 12th. So you're really only missing 1 start. So that's why they made it a 15-day IL. And now position players, they just have the 10. So it'll be interesting to see what happens, when they do get everybody back. But I think Dollander is going to be, on the big league roster for the long haul. He's got, again, just a great head on his shoulders in general. So it's going to be exciting to watch him pitch. And his next outing is going to be in San Diego this weekend. And then after that, I don't know. I have to look at the schedule.
Yeah, they've got LA and San Diego on the road trip, and then they're home for a series and gone again. So it's not a lot of action at 20th and Blake upcoming.
No, yeah. If things stay the way they are, and we'll talk about the Brewer series and who are the probables, but Dollander would go this Saturday against the Padres at Petco Park on the 12th. There's 4 games after that with an off day on Thursday, which means his third start would be on the 18th of April, Friday night, against the Nationals back in Denver. And then he would probably be, we'll see what happens after that. Maybe he'll start again on the 25th of April against the Reds, or that one could actually come in Kansas City. So if there are some of the hardcores out there, it's maybe a 9-hour drive from Denver to get to Kansas City. Certainly a short flight. I won't be on those flights, but you know what? I might think about it. I do a lot of like, okay, what would happen if, and then it doesn't come to fruition. But I like the what would happen if scenario a lot.
A little pondering about where you can catch the Rockies. I have one more question for you relating to Dollander before we shift gears to talking about Zac Veen. So Dollander comes up, and the corresponding move is the Rockies send down Bradley Blaylock to AAA. I'm intrigued by that because Blaylock last season seemed to have carved out a nice role, and I was impressed. Spring training struggled a bit with command from what I saw, and then early on, is he just not moving the needle enough for Bud Black? I was a bit surprised to see Blaylock go down. Were you as surprised?
No, only because, again, it's so many things are situational. Like, again, we'll talk about Zac Veen, but he's your spring training MVP, which is typically given out to a young player. So it's not truly like that MVP. It is just spring training. But you look at how great he played, and yet the front office at least considered there to be better options, or options that logistically, you can't have one way, but you can the other. I've said this, many times, like if you keep a prospect down in the minors and you hold on to a veteran at the big league level, you can't necessarily do the opposite. If you go ahead and DFA Nick Martini to call up Zac Veen, Martini might be gone on another team. You can't necessarily put him down in Albuquerque. So now you've got one outfielder, whereas you previously had 2. So some of it can be logistical, right? And Blaylock, I think a lot of folks were thinking, well, he's like the number 5 starter. Yeah, except that he wasn't. He was there in the bullpen just in case Senzatella broke down, just in case, Freeland went out and had another, rough start on opening day. And that didn't come to fruition. And, he hadn't been building up. I talked with him about it briefly, like how his workload has changed. It sounded like, in the bullpen, he would throw about 10 less pitches than he would normally when he would start a game to kind of get loosened up. So he really became a long reliever. And it's either going to be Bradley Blaylock or Jake Bird as your long reliever. And as we saw on Sunday, it's going to be Jake Bird. Why Bird and not Blaylock? Well, because Blaylock, when you send him down to Albuquerque, I haven't talked to anybody about this directly, but it's very logical that Blaylock down in Albuquerque now can stretch back out to become a starting pitcher. And now if Gomber can't come back and someone else goes on the IL, Blaylock then immediately becomes your next best option. Before it was Dollander going on Sunday, it was just to be determined. And he wasn't even on the 40-man roster. So your only options to start that game was Tanner Gordon and Anthony Molina in a spot start, right? Because, again, Blaylock had not been stretched out as a starting pitcher. So those are guys are coming up for one singular start. Now Blaylock can go take a step back so he can take 2 steps forward should there be, again, an injury or something along those lines. And now Blaylock can stick in that rotation. So some of it is just that logistical nature of baseball, the business side of things where, hey, you're ready to do this thing and you've done everything you can, but the pieces in front of you are kind of blocking you. And so take a step back that allow you to kind of refocus just a little bit. And then you can then rocket forward in a new role or in a new situation. And so I think that's what's going to happen with Blaylock going forward.
Patrick Lyons bringing the logic to all of the Rockies' decisions. I like that. I like that. We need to dub that title on you for literally every move the Rockies make. Some might be more difficult than others to pull the logic out of. But one that all the fans are excited, and we've already hinted at it. Zac Veen making his debut, hopefully tomorrow. He'll be with the big league squad. Gosh, he's fresh off a 5-for-5 game in AAA. I am super amped to watch his energy at Coors Field, and it starts against a Brewers team that is going to have their best pitchers going. But shoot, can you imagine if Bean goes out there first game and hits a bomb? Like, the fan base will be reinvigorated.
And against Freddie Peralta, like we're talking about an all-star pitcher here. So that certainly would be something. Yeah, I mean, it's been 24 hours since that announcement. I was actually walking by the Rockies clubhouse, exiting, and Thomas Harding broke the news, and it was, wow, I guess this is happening. So again, same day that Dollander makes his debut, Zac Veen announcement that he is getting called up. Jordan Beck going down. They've already made that move, so that's going to allow Jordan to get his feet underneath him down in Albuquerque that much quicker, and probably be in the lineup on Tuesday night when the Isotopes resume play. But we'll see what happens with Veen. There is some things he needs to clean up in his game that are they're smaller things, right? But at the big league level, they certainly can get magnified, and it's going to be exciting to let him roam free. And hopefully, he doesn't have any of those, smaller errors and things of that nature. He'll just be able to run wild, as it were. And it's going to be exciting to see what he does. Hopefully he'll be able to at least get on base so you can see that speed in action just a little bit, get the runners moving. Maybe that again can help build momentum just a little bit at the bottom of that lineup. Left-handed bat against a right-handed starter in Freddie Peralta. So it'll be exciting. The fans did a really nice job on Sunday during the announcements when they announced the lineup, and you saw Dollander coming into the dugout giving high fives, and there was that extra charge at Coors Field of like, yeah, this is this guy's major league debut. And so they were very much, excited for that. So I think the same thing is going to happen for Zac Veen. And, that might not necessarily mean a sellout. There was only about 26,000 there on Sunday, a dip of about 1,000 from Saturday, and a dip of 20,000 from the home opener, which is to be expected. And so this is a Tuesday night. It's a school night against the Milwaukee Brewers, who don't necessarily travel well. But again, for those hardcore fans that have already changed their schedule to move things around, I don't know if you ever did a podcast with Stephen Rice, formerly of the Fresno Grizzlies. He's now with We the Hobby up in Rochester, New York, but he flew in just for that game with his lady. So that was really awesome that he did that. I know some other people were able to arrange last minute to get a ticket and get to the ballpark. And that's honestly the last, or rather the first time that I've heard fans do something like that in a long time. Maybe, hey, Skeens is pitching. Yeah, I want to get a ticket. But there was never anything for the Rockies that would have, gotten the fans excited enough, other than Charlie Blackmon's retirement, which, again, we knew about it, a week or so in advance. So, it was an exciting day. It was definitely something that I first got to witness in spring training when he was just throwing live batting practice, and there was just a buzz and a lot more people, around one of the backfields to watch him throw to Chris Bryant and McMahon and Tovar. And so you got to see that on a much larger scale in Denver. And I think, it might be a little bit smaller for Zac Veen, but that being said, I think there are those, hardcore fans that are out there that are going to be very excited to see him. They're going to be cheering at the top of their lungs. They might have purple hair already, as it were. I don't know, but Tuesday is going to be another really exciting and, potentially the start of a franchise changing type game and a franchise changing, debut for the Rockies.
Yeah, and as you were saying, infield hits kind of going along with it. It's been a while since the Rockies had a series of exciting debuts at home. The one I can pinpoint in my head was Dom Nunez, because he went yard at Coors Field in his first game. But yeah, it has been a while. And I think you mentioned Veen's speed. That has to come into play, because the Rockies have not been successful on the base paths early in the season. And Beck, who they sent down, currently leads the team, and he had 3. So it felt like Beck wasn't getting on base at an extreme rate by any stretch, but when he was on, he was swiping bags. And that's something Veen will look to do. I think as we try to project what to expect from Veen, it's difficult. But, I mean, gosh, when Nolan Jones came up in 2023, I don't think anyone predicted that he'd go for 20 home runs, 20 stolen bases. Is it super far-fetched to say that Zac Veen could get there? I don't think so. And it would be a huge win for the Rockies as an organization if that can happen. But as we learned with Nolan Jones, got to build on that, right? It can't just be a flash in the pan.
I'd be more apt to take 15-30. How about that? I don't know
Oh.
that he has that much power in his bat. Again, it's still developing. He's still, 23 years old. He's still a young man. So again, that power could increase. The 30 bases, obviously becomes a challenge because you do got to get on base, decent enough. There just have to be those situations. And if he's batting in the bottom of the lineup, when he's coming up, you don't want to potentially take the bat out of Brenton Doyle, Ezekiel Tova, or Ryan McMahon's hands. So he might not get that green light quite as often if he was hitting somewhere else in the order. Excuse me, hitting somewhere else in the order. So I don't know if he'll hit the ground running quite the same way that Chase Dollander was able to. So I can't say I necessarily have concerns, but I like that you brought up Nolan Jones because it took him a while to get going, right? Like first he got called up, didn't even get a chance to play, which I don't think is going to happen here at Zac Veen.
He was there for 3 days and didn't get to play.
Yeah. Watched the Mariners, got to enjoy Julio Rodriguez. Actually, no, Julio Rodriguez, I think, was hurt in that series. But nevertheless, yeah, I think, he'll get that playing time, but it could be slow going. And, for whatever reason, the organization said, and I don't want to say said, but they felt more comfortable going through those growing pains with Zac Veen right now than Jordan Beck. And I don't necessarily know if I would agree with that, only from the simple fact that, or I just don't know if I'm on the same page with that, or if it surprises me, simply because with all of the extra outfielders that they have outside of Brenton Doyle, there's 4 outfielders. Now you've got 3 left-handed hitters and only 1 right-handed hitter. Whereas when you had Jordan Beck, you had 2 right-handed hitters and 3 lefties. So I'm not sure how that's going to work. Perhaps this is, again, just a sign of things to come where Beck's going to go down. Maybe he's not going to stay in AAA for a very long amount of time. And there might be a move where either Martini or Mickey Moniak are gone. And then everyone does get what they want. They have both Beck and Veen. Something like that could happen. In the chat, I think Zac Veen, is still working a little bit on his outfield defense. We know he has speed, but that speed doesn't always translate to, defensive range in the outfield. So I tend to think that it might be Moniak in left, in Zac Veen in right, but not incredibly confident in that. But that's where I see things is Veen in right, where it's a little bit smaller area to cover, and Moniak in left, who I can't say I've had my questions about defensively, but I've seen a couple things that make me go, I don't know, but he's been fine. And of course, you saw that sliding catch to open Dollander's start on the first pitch. That was great. There was another play where he took charge, where he was coming in, Tovar was coming back. They were both converging on it, and called him off. And so he did a good job, being loud there in that spot. So I think Moniak left, Veen right, but we'll see tomorrow.
And who's to say that Martini doesn't start, because he's been a consistent bat early in the season. But I like the way that you mentioned it could be a very, very quick trip to the minors for Jordan Beck, and it's all about consistent at bats. Can he perform there? Because I think the Rockies were pleased with his development last year, and they gave him that shot before he ultimately broke his hand in my first game at Coors Field in the middle of May. I'm curious with the way that the Rockies have been trending with their young players. Who's next? It feels like the door is wide open, and I'm wondering if you have a guy that sticks out.
It's funny because everybody in the chat in the emergency pod on Sunday night over on the Rockies Insider was like, oh, this guy's next, this guy. I'm like, you guys are sounding a lot, and I mean this as a compliment, like Yankees fans and Dodgers fans. Like, this isn't enough. Give me more. Give me more. Justin, very excited to see Zac Veen. I'm not sure. I think Veen and Dollander were the two biggest names, obviously coming out of spring training. A lot of fans of Blake Street Banner, I think, are probably well versed in who's coming up next. I tend to think Adiel Amador might be the next one to get a notable call up and a notable opportunity, not just come around for about a week, and then when this guy comes off the IL, we're going to send you back down. That's what I see with Yanquiel Fernandez. There just isn't that place for him in the outfield, and there are some defensive questions, despite the fact that he's got a cannon. He would qualify as a Colorado cannon, but that range and taking various routes to the ball leaves something to be desired. So I think Amador could be that next big one. Juan Mejia, we've yet to see make his major league debut. He's on the 40-man roster, but again, you're calling up a relief pitcher. That's not cause for an emergency podcast. Same thing with Amador. He's already made his debut. So I think Amador's that next one, but look, there's still other guys in AAA that need to be added to the 40-man roster this winter that we're going to see at some point at Coors Field. Sterling Thompson, Ryan Ritter, Carson Palmquist, Zach Agnos. Agnos, probably you like to spend the most amount of time from that group up in the majors with his skill set in that bullpen. But these are the two guys that are going to provide the biggest pop and name recognition. Veen, probably even more so than Dollander, because he was drafted in 2020 at a time in which no one was doing anything. And that draft was one of the few things going on. So I think a lot of those players were like immediately iconic in various ways. Like, man, I can't wait for this guy to come up. And he's kind of in that group in some way. So, he's healthy now, and this call up probably should have come about 2 years ago, but injuries derailed that. So now is finally time for Zac Veen.
And even so, he's only 23. It feels like we've been waiting on this for a long time as Rockies fans, and those who cover the sport. But he's only 23. Zac Veen still has plenty of time to put together a very long, illustrious career. And I think getting him up now makes sense, whereas in the past it could have made sense, but it would have been a bit of a stretch. He's not ready. All of this. I think this is his time, and I just hope that he gets off to a quick start.
Yeah, one of the names I didn't include in that list of like a big name that's a call up for for numerous reasons. Hunter Goodman's now the guy as the catcher with Jacob Stallings. Again, Adiel Amador was a bigger name last year, blooms off the rose just a little bit, but he also debuted. Drew Romo also debuted, and I was able to get word that injury to his finger in the final game of minor league spring training is actually a broken finger. So Drew Romo, not really sure when he comes back. Everything that he's been through, and with the situation with Hunter Goodman, what are your thoughts? What are your levels of concern on Drew Romo and this news of him breaking his finger and setting him back even further?
Yeah, not great. A couple of years ago, I really thought Drew Romo was the future of the franchise at the catcher position. I think a lot of people did. Hunter Goodman had a great start to the year, and he did get back in the hit column yesterday to break an 0 for 13 slide where it felt like there were a lot of strikeouts. Now, we're going to have to continue to say this. That's a very small sample size. But, yeah, I Drew Romo, the throw lollipop style, the yips, does scare me being a major league catcher, and yet he still throws runners out at a perfectly fine rate in the minor leagues. The bat has to be somewhere where he can produce. That's what ultimately separates quad A guys from big league guys, right? Like if he's going to continue to play well in AAA when he's back and healthy, got to have something translate. And I think there's an opportunity, if he does get it going, to make an impression on the major league roster. I know Hunter Goodman has that spot right now, but I think there's at least room for, if Goodman goes on a slide, not saying I want this to happen, of course, but Romo will have a chance to make an impression. Now, I don't know the timetable for a broken finger, but really quick, I have a question related to injuries. Luis Peralta took a missile off the back lat yesterday. Anything there post game? Is he all good?
I peeked over when we were waiting for Dollander because I wanted to see, and he was walking by and I could see the bruise kind of just like above his kidney. I thought it got his kidney area because you saw him like collapse to the ground. So it was a little bit above that. Buddy had said it was like lower lat situation there. So, maybe maybe there's a couple of fibers, but it mostly got muscle. So, he might be all right. I'm not really sure if it being on his left side, if it was on his right, that would make it easier for him to throw. So he could be a little bit tight. We'll see what happens. Maybe by the time we get there on Tuesday, we'll get word that he is going to get sent down or really just go on the 15-day IL and somebody else gets called up. But that would be a shame because his brother's coming to town and his brother's pitching on Tuesday. So that's a perfect segue to talk about the Brewer series. We got Kyle Freeland against Freddie Peralta on Tuesday. Antonio Senzatella against Tyler Alexander, who's the probable on Wednesday. And then maybe the newly acquired Quinn Priester from the Boston Red Sox. Brewers just picked him up in a deal on Monday against Ryan Feltner. I thought that the Rockies had a decent shot at taking 2 or 3 from the A's, and they did. I mean, they were in all 3 of those games. The Rockies, again, despite the 2-6 record, in many ways it does look like last season, which was a 100-loss season and was really bad. And they've got a long way to go to change my mind in convincing me that they're not a 100-loss team. But they've been in all 9 games. They have not really been beaten in those 7 losses in the 2-7 start. They've not really been beaten. They have beat themselves. They have lost those games more than another team beat them. So perhaps that's a shift in things. Like that's part of that growth to go from being essentially rock bottom up to, okay, now we can kind of win some games when we need to. We're learning how to figure out a couple things and then become, winners. So that remains to be seen if they can, do that a little bit and get out of that hole. But perhaps, again, that is part of it. The simple fact that, they just haven't gotten whooped in these first 9 games. They've been in every single one.
And that's a testament to the starting pitching that has been top entering the day yesterday before Chase gave up a couple runs. They were second in Major League Baseball in starters ERA, which is a great sign because if they can keep it up, the Rockies will continue to give themselves a chance. Now, the worry is, if they're overachieving right now and they come back to earth, the Rockies are already 2-7. So I understand the concerns there. And I want to stay pretty objective on it because it is what it is, right? But
I mentioned the Rockies being rock bottom or hitting rock bottom. They were rock bottom in something that's was circulating around the internet about how many mentions and recognitions on MLB.com. Only 3 over the first week of the season. 29th was twice as many, 6 mentions for the Guardians. Rockies only had 3. Dodgers were all the way up at 68 naturally. You think if you recalculated now, they would have probably bumped up a spot because they've had a couple things that, are interesting, both, in the positive sphere and the prospect sphere, and then in just the general craziness that is baseball and highlights, right? You think probably they've gone up to 28th or 27th at this point after the past weekend.
I think because of Dollander's debut and because they had a snow opening day, that's got to bump them up at least a couple spots, hopefully.
And triple play.
Oh yeah, that was crazy. That was the first.
That was wild.
I mean, the last one the Rockies had was 2015, and at that point I was 11. So this was the first one I ever remember watching, which was freaking sweet. That was awesome.
Yeah, no, I'd never seen one. I've been to about 450 games. I probably watched about 5 times as many as that, and I can't ever remember watching one. And, if you go back and watch that play, if it was on at a sports bar and you were talking to someone, there's some events that when they happen, you're like, hold on a second. Whoa, what is going on in this game? That was not one of those plays. You would have seen it in the corner of your eye and you're like, double play, whatever. Like, you don't know what a triple play looks like, right? Like it's one of those things that is synonymous, I think, with baseball. And yet it's something where, describe a triple play. All right. I guess the runners have to be stealing and then this guy has to hit a line drive, but not too hard. Like you'd have to create some kind of crazy scenario. And yet this one was like, it was a double play, with a little extra something on it, right?
And I don't know, I believe, was it you that asked Ryan McMahon after the game if he's ever been involved in anything? He said, no, not even in minor leagues, high school, anything.
Yeah, there was someone who he said, yeah, I've never even attempted one. And then someone I heard in the background of like, oh my God, you've never even attempted it. And I'm thinking like, that's not a thing. You don't like attempt a triple play. Like it just means, we almost got a triple play. You don't even almost get a triple play, right? Like I don't even know if I've ever seen an almost triple play where imagine if the runner would have beaten it out and it's like, oh, totally. You got to stretch a little bit more. Still got a double play, but it was this close to a triple play. You don't even see that. So, yeah. And he took a shot at Tolia. Said, I don't know where that ball is. Tolia probably threw it into the stands, knowing him. So that was, on another rough loss for the Rockies. It was at least a fun little quip on the way out.
And Tolia, he's probably thinking about hitting a ball in the stands one of these days, right? He feels due.
Starting to heat up just a little bit. Yeah. But yeah, I imagine he's chomping at the bit to get going. And maybe again, this series, they'll be able to pick that up after the 12 runs on Sunday. Sometimes it takes that second home series before the bats really come alive. It's going to be hard for them to come alive on the road, not just because of, the sea level situation with the marine layer, specifically in San Diego, and then the 3 in LA at Dodger Stadium, but just because of how good those teams are, that's going to make it that much more difficult. Do you think the Rockies score more runs in the next 3 days against the Brewers at home in Denver, or are you taking the 6 days in California against the Dodgers and Padres?
3 days in Denver, and I don't think it'll be close.
Okay.
What side are you on?
I'll take the 6. I think it's going to be I think it could be tight, but I could see the Rockies, maybe scratching out on average 4 runs in this Brewers series each game. So that's 12. You got 6 games to scratch 2 across on average. So I would take the 6 in California, but it might end up being close, or it could be a total blowout because we might get that answer pretty quickly if the bats can stay alive at least these first 2 games, especially if Zac Veen can get in on that action. Noah, go ahead and plug away where folks can find you and all your content.
To be careful about the point, but at Noah Spyrick on Twitter and the Instagram or the X Machine, and most of my takes also reside on at Blake Street Banter.
At Patrick D. Lyons, at Patrick D. Lyons MLB, and at Rockies Insider. DMs wide open. So if you've got questions, let me know. Appreciate everyone who jumped into the chat. Love you for that. Appreciate all the momentum you have provided Noah and I over here on the Blake Street Banner. But as I like to say, momentum, it can only be as good as your next debut. So, of course, I'll talk.